Mansfield was one of Hollywood's biggest sex symbols during the 1950s and early 60s. With her flawless beauty and her God-given gifts, she lit up the silver screen like nobody else could. Throughout her short time in Hollywood, she crafted the Jayne Mansfield image of the dumb blonde into a thriving movie career. But Hollywood discards movie stars faster than they make them. On this week's edition of Real Talk with the Hollywood Kid, we'll be talking about the life and times of one of Hollywood's biggest blonde bombshells that exploded too soon, Jayne Mansfield.
See you tomorrow.
Oh, Mr. Miller? Why do you drink so much?
Just a habit, I suppose.
A girl habit?
Girl? No, I haven't got a girl.
Mr. Miller, if it was Julie London, she wasn't very bright.
All right. My guest this afternoon has written a fantastic book called Puffblicity, in appreciation of Jayne Mansfield, the 50s pictures, which is a great read with so many very rare, colorful photos of Jayne Mansfield. Please grab a copy for it just in time for Christmas on Amazon. She joins me today to talk about the life and sometimes tragic days of Hollywood's biggest blonde bombshell, Jayne Mansfield. Author April Vivea joins me. April, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. And did I get the last name right?
You did get the last name right. Like, major props to you. No one can ever say my last name right.
Yeah, I get the same problem. I want to start off, obviously, early in Jayne Mansfield's life. When she was 3 years old, there was a tragic event in her life.
Yes, Jayne was riding in the car with her mom and dad. Her dad's name is Herbert. Her mom's name is Vera. She's riding in the car. Herbert had just had a physical. He passed his physical. They said everything was all right. All of a sudden, Herbert slumps over while they are driving up a hill, and he is dead at 33 from a heart attack. Oh Yeah, no, Vera had to quick grab the wheel. They maneuvered the car over to the side, and Jayne really never got over her father's death, and she, could remember it even as an adult, which is pretty understandable.
Let's talk a little bit about her early life, her teenage years. She was a very versed pianist.
She was. Jayne actually was a pianist, and she was a concert-level violinist. She had first chair, in her school's band, and Jayne has a very privileged life. I mean, even Jayne will admit that she comes from an upper middle class family. Herbert works as a salesman, but he is bringing in, about $2,000 a year. But at the time, that is extremely good money. At 16, she meets Paul Mansfield, and she remembered that she fell in love with him because he had extremely beautiful blue eyes, and he was, this all-American guy. And Jayne finds herself pregnant.
Oh, my goodness.
So Jayne and Paul both would later tell a story that they eloped on January 28th in 1950, although there's nothing to support that. What actually happened was Jayne came out and told her parents that she was pregnant, and they quick rushed down and got married as soon as Jayne graduated high school. It was a very, big thing. Apparently, Paul announces to the entire school that Jayne is pregnant and that they are getting married at Jayne's graduation dinner, which, of course, didn't go over well. But, she tries to settle down to married life, but she dreams of, becoming an actress. Her favorite actress is Jean Tierney. She, wants to be serious. She wants to be this really ravishing brunette. But, she has to settle down to motherhood. She goes to school. She has a little girl in November of 1950 named Jane Marie. And she takes Jane Marie to class with her. In fact, Jayne liked to recall a story of when she went to her biology class that she would have Jane Marie sitting next to her, and they would give Jane Marie a frog to dissect.
A what? A what?
They gave like a 1-year-old child a frog to dissect. Jayne was very creative with her stories. That was a story that she liked to tell. But, Jayne has the Hollywood bug, and she really, wants to go to Hollywood. She wants to become a model, and then eventually an actress. So in 1951, which, goodness bless her, I couldn't imagine getting back to pre-baby weight within like 6 months, but Jayne did it. 1951, Jayne goes out to Hollywood, and she, tries to get work as a model. She goes to UCLA for her summer semester, and there's really no nipples on her. I mean, she does well with her modeling, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And she gets a telegram from Paul after she had entered the Miss Southern California contest. And Paul says, well, you're actually a Mrs., and if you don't get back to Texas, I am going to tell the officials that you are a Mrs. So Jayne is pretty devastated, but she moves back to Texas under the agreement that she and Paul will eventually move back to California because Paul is in the Army and he is going to go to Korea. So Jayne, moves back to Texas, goes with Paul. She goes and lives on the military base with Paul. She performs for, the servicemen in his area who all find her devastatingly attractive, according to Jayne. And she likes to work out outside of their little, bungalow on the base in a leotard, which actually gets her in trouble with the superior's wives who tell her basically you need to put more clothes on.
Wow. Yeah, you remember, this is 1950s. This is not 2019. So how does she get discovered? Because there was always rumors that producer Louis Kellman discovered her on the set of Pete Kelly's Blues. How did she actually get discovered?
So Jayne eventually gets Paul to agree to move back to California. He does fulfill his end of the bargain. And this is in 1954 at this point. And Jayne goes out, and the first thing she decides to do is find herself a press agent. And she meets a man named Jim Byron. Now, Jim Byron, I don't think there's an equivalent of anyone like Jim Byron today. I guess somebody who manages the Kardashians would be the closest thing I can come up with. And he starts throwing her into these little publicity stunts. The one that she always liked to recall is she dressed up as a sexy Santa. It's fitting because we're close to Christmas, isn't it? And she goes to newspapermen's offices and she passes out bottles of whiskey. And she ends up being in newspapers all around Los Angeles, and people are like, who is this woman? So after that stunt, she goes and, well, I shouldn't say she goes, Jim goes, and he lands her a ticket to Silver Springs, Florida, to attend the premiere of Jane Russell's film Underwater. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen Underwater. It's not very good.
Can imagine.
It's not that great, but it's a Howard Hughes production. The premiere actually took place underwater. You had to wear a scuba tank and watch the movie underwater. But Jayne gets there. She gets there a day before Jane Russell is there, and this is in the middle of January. So even though it's Florida, it's still pretty cold. But she gets, there in the middle of January, and she poses in a very risque one piece, as well as a bikini. Supposedly her bikini top flies off. And press photographers take so many photos of her that they don't have any film to take pictures of the other stars who are there, like Debbie Reynolds. Jayne is an absolute hit, and people are like, who is this woman? We want to know who she is.
And for my audience, for my audience out there who do not know who Jane Russell was, in her own right, she was stunning.
She was. I mean, it's pretty hard to overshadow Jane
Right,
Russell.
exactly.
So she's, sitting. There are no photos of her with Jane Russell from the Underwater premiere that I know of. Supposedly, according to Jane Russell in her autobiography, she refused to pose with the blonde tomato who was taking up all of the publicity. But Jayne gets back. Howard Hughes speaks to the press and says, oh, I'm going to sign her, add her to his stable of starlets, which that's a whole nother thing. But he doesn't. And Warner Brothers comes around and they're, nibbling. And Jayne signs a contract and she starts working for Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers has no idea what to do with her. They talk about putting her in Rebel Without a Cause. Of course, that does not end up going as planned.
Because did she actually audition for the role of Natalie Wood?
She did. She actually auditioned for the role, and her costume test footage pictures still survive. But I don't think anyone could imagine Jayne as a 16-year-old.
I know. Yeah, for Nicholas Ray, he was a little strange in his own right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're totally fine. So she actually has an affair with Nicholas Ray.
I think everybody did.
I
Men and women.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's pretty fair. Male or female, you probably slept with Nicholas Ray at some point.
Did you know obviously you know the story about Gloria Graham?
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. That's a whole nother can of worms, isn't it?
For my audience who don't know that story, just Google it. Go ahead.
Nicholas Ray actually gives her a pet bunny, which she has, pictures with her pet bunny, and she's pretty close with Ray. We'll just leave it at that, I guess. But she's sitting there. Warner Brothers throws her in parts like illegal, which is very reminiscent of Marilyn's role in The Asphalt Jungle. If no one has seen that movie as Edward G. Robinson, I actually quite enjoy it, but, Jayne has very little screen time. They throw her in Pete's Kelly's Blues as a cigarette girl. And then in July, they decide, we don't know what to do with this woman. We're going to drop her. And Jayne is left without a studio contract. This is in 1955 still. So Jayne's, sitting there. She would claim that Warner Brothers parted with her over creative differences, but that obviously is not true. They just dropped her. But what ends up happening is she receives a phone call asking if she would be willing to try out for the role of Rita Marlowe in George Axelrod's new play, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? I do want to point out that if anyone has seen the movie Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, it is completely different than the stage play. It has the devil in it, and it's all about how horrible Hollywood is. George Axelrod was apparently extremely disappointed with how Hollywood had handled The 7-Year Itch, which was his first play, but I digress. So she comes in, and George Axelrod basically just says if she can talk, she has the role. And she fully encompasses Rita Marlowe. Rita Marlowe is a very obvious caricature of Marilyn.
Right.
She's very conniving, but she puts on this, dumb blonde image. And Jayne falls right into that. There were, questions about whether or not Jayne could carry the play, but she obviously did. It was one of the most successful plays of the 55-56 season. And Jayne is just thrust into the national spotlight. I've gone through thousands of newspapers, and I can honestly say that every single newspaper has something about Jayne, daily. Especially if you go into New York,
which is what she wanted.
It is what she wanted. I mean, people don't have to like Jayne, but you have to respect her hustle.
Well, they always say the men loved her, the women hated her.
Yeah, no, you could kind of see why. I mean, Jayne's definitely out there. She's not afraid of, showing herself off.
Again, for 1954, 55, I mean, it's pretty risque.
Yeah, no, most definitely. So, Jayne's the toast of Broadway. Everything is going really, really well. Play's still going into 1956, obviously, and Jayne sits there and she has a bunch of reporters that are following her basically nonstop, and they ask her about her day, and Jayne proudly says, well, I only sleep for about 2 hours a night because I'm always doing things for publicity. Which that would come back to bite Jayne, sadly. But at the time, she's doing pretty well. Finally, in May 13th, 1956, if we're going to be extremely specific, Jayne meets Mickey Hargitay.
Yeah, I want to get into that. Let's talk about how they met. They met at the Latin Quarters in New York. Talk a little bit about what happened that night.
They did. They met the Latin Quarter in New York. Mickey was actually working for the very formidable Mae West as one of her muscle men in, her show that she would perform. Mickey had gotten involved with Mae right after he won the Mr. Universe title. And Mae wanted this image that every man who worked with her, or for her, I should say, wanted to sleep with her. And it was in their contracts that they could not date anybody, at least publicly, while they were performing, with Mae. Of course, Jayne is a very public person, so this doesn't, really mesh well. But Jayne sits there. She goes to the Latin Quarter. She supposedly says, I'll have a stake in the man on the right. And the man on the right is, of course, Mickey. Mickey runs to Jayne after, their show's over, and they basically spend the night together. According to them, they're just talking. I will let people decide on their own what happened. But, they spend the whole night talking, and they are inseparable. So this, of course, goes against Mickey's contract with Mae West, and Mae is absolutely furious. She just cannot believe that this guy that is supposed to be madly in love with her is going with somebody she considers to be, kind of a blonde floozy. And so Mae, sits there. She pulls Mickey to go with her to Washington, D.C. for another, performance as part of her tour stop. She tells Mickey he has to come, and he just sits there and he stays on the phone all night with Jayne while they're in D.C. This just makes Mae more mad. So Mae decides to call a press conference, and at this press conference, Mickey is supposed to tell everybody in attendance that he is just with Jayne for publicity and he can't, really stand her, basically. Mickey doesn't do that. Instead, Mickey says, I am madly in love with Jayne. I can't wait to go back with her. Yeah. Basically commits Mae West's career suicide. But he sits there, he goes, and Paul Novak, who ended up being Mae's partner until she passed away, slugs Mickey in the face. And Mae, I don't think I can properly convey the chaos that surrounds this event. He slugs Mickey in the face. Mae West falls down and starts screaming that she's an institution.
She should be in one.
Yeah, no, she's an institution. She just keeps saying, I'm Mae West, I'm an institution. And so it's complete chaos. Mickey,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mickey is just like flabbergasted. Quick gets on a plane to New York after he is stitched up and takes pictures with Jayne the next morning.
Wow. What a night.
That is the night that she supposedly fell in love with Paul. And she made him like her head person for really the rest of her life. I mean, after Mae West died, Paul said, my mission in life was to care for Mae West. So, I mean, Mae West did get a happy ending out of it.
Right.
Just not the ending she wanted at the time. Mae was extremely bitter, though, about the situation. And in her autobiography, she brought up the fight and how Mickey was basically like a complete gigolo. She's just like, he was at my door every night crying about how he wanted to sleep with me, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. She was over the top, Mae West, though. Way over the top.
She was.
A little bit.
I think for the full Mae West treatment, everyone should see Sextet at least once in their life.
She's like in her 80s in that movie?
Yeah. She's, let me see. She would be 87, and she's supposed to be 28.
Oh, my goodness.
So, and she thought she could pass for it, but Alice Cooper's in it, and he has an afro.
It's over, May. It's over. It's over. It's over.
So, where was I? Oh, yeah, no, back to Mickey. So Mickey runs to Jayne's side. He starts insulting May by telling her that he, could never be, because May's going around saying, oh, he was in love with me. And he says, I could never be in love with a 70-year-old woman. And Jayne sits there and says, maybe when I'm older, I could play Mae West, but, basically that she's too young to play May at this point. And she's, 23? Yeah, she's 23.
Yeah, a little bit.
So they go back and forth. There ends up being a whole lawsuit. It gets thrown out. Mickey did get some sort of settlement from a side thing with it. It's just this whole thing. But that's how Jayne and Mickey met. I guess you could say they met with a bang.
Very memorable, anyways. April, so from 1956 to 1962, she was at 20th Century Fox. I mean, how was that time for her? Did she enjoy it?
So, what happens with Fox is they come, biting around Jayne in January of 1956, and they're kind of sharky and they're circling around her. She actually had signed her contract with them in March of 1956, but she had an offer from MGM as well. And I like to think that if she had gone with the MGM contract, she probably would have had a bit of a better time. But she signed with Fox. They apparently promised to make her, their biggest and best blonde bombshell. I mean, again, at that point, she's 22. She hasn't had her birthday yet, so she's 22, and she's believing everything Fox tells her. Fox flies her out in September, and Mickey comes along as well, of 1956, and Jayne starts filming the next day. The following Monday, I should say. She came out on September 16th, which was a Saturday, and she started filming The Girl Can't Help It on September 18th. What Jayne doesn't realize with Fox is that Fox is going to squeeze every dime out of her that they paid to get her out of her Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter contract. But to answer your question, I would say at the beginning she was happy and she thought Fox treated her well, but towards the end she was glad to be out of her contract.
I mean, obviously, Jayne was known as the poor woman's Marilyn Monroe. I mean, did they even have a relationship, them two?
No. Jayne liked to pretend that they had a relationship. I've done a lot on Marilyn. Was there any
jealousy? Because, a lot of times back then, the studio system would hire somebody that would look like Marilyn Monroe. They would hire another woman that looked like her just to show her, listen, if you act up, we'll just plug her in.
Yeah, and they had tried that with Cherie North. Of course, Cherie sadly never really took off. And Jayne was kind of Cherie North's replacement to be Marilyn's replacement. Marilyn at this point was saying that she wasn't going to do lighthearted comedies anymore, that she wanted to focus on dramatics. She released Bus Stop in 1956. She had The Prince and the Showgirl in 1956. So I think Fox really did think that Marilyn was going to turn a new leaf. And they went with Jayne, who was much more sexualized than Marilyn was. Marilyn has, this kind of innocent flair about her. That sounds so cliche, but that's just kind of how she is. And Jayne's like, oh no, here I am, enjoy it.
Right.
But, and Jayne didn't really care for the Marilyn comparisons. Their only public event where they were photographed together was the Rose Tattoo premiere, which was in December of 1955. But we do know that they went to some of the same events. Jayne was at the Golden Globes almost every year. And Marilyn obviously attended the 59 ceremony as well as the 62 ceremony.
And again, 55, 56, and mid-50s. How was she doing, her and Mickey doing financially? Because I want to get into the Pink Palace.
Oh, okay. So they are actually doing pretty well financially. Jayne signs a contract. The contract has never seen the light of day, at least to my knowledge. But from what has been reported, she's earning roughly $1,500 a week just to start out, which is extremely good money at that point. And She's going with Mickey. Jayne had come, like I said before, from kind of a wealthy family, and she actually owned a house in Los Angeles. It was on Wanda Park Drive. The house is still standing. The owners are probably going to kill me for saying that, but whatever. I visited. Anyway, but she has this house on Wanda Park Drive, and it's called Mansfield Madness because of all the animals Jayne has running around. And Mickey has an apartment that's not too far from Jayne's house, but I want to put apartment in air quotes because in actuality he's living with Jayne, but that can't come out in the 1950s. Mickey just kind of does side jobs. He has a very thick Hungarian accent, so it's not like he can really do a whole lot in films, although he does appear briefly in Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter. But, they're doing pretty solid, I guess you could say. Jayne, though, wants to have this, gigantic mansion. And so she ends up selling Mansfield Madness in late 1957, and she puts the money down on 10100 Sunset Boulevard, and that will eventually become the Pink Palace. Now, to help pay off the house, Jayne and Mickey get married in January of 1958, and in February of 58, they go and they perform it in Vegas. And Jayne has the highest salary any Vegas performer had at that time, which was $25,000 a week.
Wow.
And she's originally slated to play for 4 weeks, but they extended it to 6 weeks.
Now, what did they pay for the Pink Palace? Like 76,000?
Yeah, they pay $75,000. It has like 11 bathrooms and 8 bedrooms, and it's gigantic. It had been Rudy Vallee's. He had the house, and he was the one who had built it, and then it had passed through a few owners, and Jayne gets it, and Jayne decides to make it basically a shrine to kitsch. That's all I can say about it. It has 4-inch shag in the living room. That is actually white, not pink. For some reason, people think that the living room carpet was pink. It's not. It's white. But she completely carpets her bathroom, and I would implore anyone who wants to see a pink shag carpet bathroom to go look it up, because Jayne's is just, it's kind of a monstrosity, and I love her, and I hate saying that, but it's unique.
Right. It's sort of like a Graceland West, with the shag carpets and stuff.
Yeah, it's just, the house is insane. Jayne installs an elevator. She goes around telling the press that she wants to have 10 children and she wants to fill up the house. And Jayne and Mickey are, getting kind of flashy with their money. I just want to back up really quick, though, because 1957, April of 1957, is when Jayne takes the Sophia Loren photos.
Yeah, that was my next question. I want to talk about this very infamous photo. For my audience who've never seen this photo, please go Google this photo. It's such an infamous photo. Now, there's a big misconception where that photo was taken. Where was that photo taken?
Oh, so that photo was taken at Romanoff's, and I hate doing this, but Sophia Loren said in her book that it was a party thrown by Paramount and basically that Jayne crashed the party. That actually is not true. Fox threw the party for Sophia Loren, even though they never signed her, because they had the distribution rights to The Boy on a Dolphin, which was an Italian-made film. It has some very famous photos of a very wet Sophia Loren. That's where those photos come from. But they had agreed to throw the party for her as a welcome to Hollywood party, and Jayne was told that she had to go. And I will be the first person to admit that Jayne was prone to fibbing, but I wouldn't say that she's fibbing over this incident because it's not very Jayne-y. Usually when Jayne would arrive and have one of her publicity stunts, she would come in, she would look, pretty demure, at least as demure as Jayne Mansfield can look, and she would mingle and everything. And then when the attention wasn't on her, she would have a stunt, like a strap would break or a breast would fall out. I mean, whatever she was doing.
She was ahead of her time, for nowadays.
She was definitely ahead of her time. So she has all of that. That's just her MO. And she's usually at these things for a couple hours because, she wants to enjoy it too. But the Sophia photos, she basically walks in, goes to Sophia's table, gets the pictures taken of her, and then leaves. She's there for about half an hour tops, and that's just not Jayne's MO. According to Jayne, the Fox publicity department told her to go and, show Sophia her support, and I put that in quotes. And Jayne goes, she has her wardrobe malfunction, I guess we could say. And I would say, based off of everything I've done with Jayne, that Fox knew she was going to pull something that night. I just don't think they knew exactly what she was going to pull. But it works out extremely well for Fox because they sent her on a European tour in late 1957, and Fox schedules quote-unquote bust-offs. And it's where starlets will barge in while Jayne's having Jayne is having a press conference. A starlet will barge in and say that she has bigger measurements than Jayne, but they don't actually ever measure either one of them. And miraculously, these starlets they do get arrested, but they're never charged with anything, and they're let go within 20 minutes of arriving at the police station. So it's pretty evident that they're plants.
She also made a film with Cary Grant, and then supposedly this was the first film that he ever lost money on. What would happen with that?
Oh, okay. So the film came out in December of 1957. It's called Kiss Them For Me. And I'm not
even going to go there. I'm not even going to go ahead.
I am actually going to defend Jayne on this, and not just because I absolutely adore her. I own the press book for Kiss Them For Me, and the entire thing is about pushing Susie Parker. Now, Susie Parker is Cary Grant's love interest in the film. Jayne actually is playing second fiddle in this one. And Susie Parker was described by one reviewer back in the day as walking and talking just like the mannequin, she is, because Susie Parker was a very famous model. And the movie completely flops. Now, I'm not saying Jayne didn't have a part in it, because obviously if people were in love with Jayne, they would have flocked to it anyway. But Susie Parker just completely fizzles out. Fox tries pushing her in a few other movies. Her career never takes off. The biggest thing she did when it comes to, being on any type of screen was appearing in an episode of The Twilight Zone. But, Susie she's very stiff. We'll just leave it at that. Right. But you are right. Supposedly it's the first movie to star Cary Grant and lose money. I've never found where it actually lost money. I think it probably broke about even, but it's not a successful movie by any stretch of the imagination. So, Fox puts it on Jayne, which I wouldn't say is entirely fair, because Jayne would make money in her movies, whereas Susie Parker movies did not make money. But Jayne, is basically told, hey, this is your fault. And, it's because you're going to marry Mickey Hargitay that you lost money. But, what can you do? That's how Fox is.
So they end up getting married. And how many? I heard that from what I've read, there was lots and lots of people there. Were there any A-listers show up at the time?
The only A-lister who shows up is Bob Hope.
Bob Hope. That must have been
Bob.
He probably gave him 3 cents. He probably put $1 in the envelope. He was notoriously cheap.
No, Bob Hope is actually their witness. Jayne had invited people. They didn't really want to come. It's Jayne. Like I said, the closest thing I can think to describe her to, and Jayne fans will get mad when they hear this, but the closest I can describe her to is kind of being like a Kardashian. She's an actress, obviously, and she does reasonably well with what she does.
Did Hollywood and her colleagues, did they take her seriously as an actress?
Not really. She does try, but you always see Jayne Mansfield, and then you see Jayne Mansfield's movies. You know?
Right. I mean, she was a stereotypical Hollywood blonde bombshell.
Exactly. And she's not sitting there really trying to make friends. I mean, she would claim that she was friends with a lot of people. The only person I can really find that she was genuinely friends with and did a lot with that was female was Terry Moore, who luckily is still with us.
Yes. I tried getting her.
Yeah, no, she's very interesting from what I have heard. But anyway, so, you know, Jayne's sitting there, she's trying, but she can never really break into the Hollywood circle. But people in the let me back up. She can never break into the Hollywood circle publicly. She can privately. I'm friends with Jayne's third husband, Matt Simber, and Matt has some great stories about basically everyone in Hollywood coming to their house, the Pink Palace, at least once. So, you know, and that's pretty common. You know, you don't really acknowledge a whole lot publicly, but you hang out more privately. But anyway, Jayne never really breaks in, though, when it comes to celebrities coming to her public events.
April, I want to talk a little bit about 1962 because that was a horrible year for Jayne. She gets dropped by her studio. February 7th and 8th of 62, tragedy struck her and Mickey.
It did. So Jayne and Mickey go down to the Bahamas. They're going water skiing. It's supposedly going to be kind of a, you know, fourth honeymoon for the couple because they basically honeymoon all the time. But, you know, they're supposed to be honeymooning down there again. And all of a sudden, somebody screams out, "Shark." And Jayne, quite understandably, freaks out. She's on water skis while this is happening, and she falls into the water. She supposedly bumps her head pretty hard, you know, from her accident. Mickey dives into the water. He can't find her. And then all of a sudden, he, like, feels her fingertips while he's, you know, going around looking for her. And he quick pulls her up. Their boat capsized when he tried to put her back in the boat. And they're with a press agent, and all three of them have to swim to basically like a shelf, and it's like a coral shelf, and they spend the night there. Newspapers are just like screaming, you know, Jayne Mansfield possibly dead, Jayne Mansfield missing at sea. And they finally, you know, get rescued by, you know, a patrol, well, I shouldn't say ship, but a patrol boat that's going in the area. And Jayne is extremely sunburned and covered in sand flea bites, and she is suffering from exhaustion. Mickey is also suffering from exhaustion and exposure to the elements. And people go around saying that it's just another one of Jayne's, like, you know,
right, press, you know, publicity type of deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say Jayne was absolutely devastated that people would think that.
We got like 5 more minutes left. I'm gonna try to cram some stuff in. That was just a little side note. That was also the year Marilyn Monroe passed away as well.
It was, and Jayne did claim that she was extremely devastated by that.
I talk a little bit about her Playboy magazine when she was in Playboy. Real quick.
Oh, so, you know, Jayne and Mickey, they start having some marital issues. 1963 comes around. Jayne's already threatened to file for divorce once. Jayne does this movie, Promises, with Tommy Noonan, and she is nude in the movie. Playboy gets the exclusive rights to take photos of Jayne, you know, while she's nude. And they run in the June 1963 issue of Playboy, which gets Hugh Hefner thrown in jail for obscenity charges because Jayne is naked and writhing around on a bed in the photos.
The horror.
Yeah.
The horror.
The absolute horror. You know, Jayne's dropped by Fox in 62, so, you know, 63, she's having to resort to being nude in films. Jayne and Mickey get divorced in 1964. She marries Matt a few months later in September of 64. Their marriage is, you know, it's not quite a meeting of the minds. Matt
Right.
wants to focus more on stage work, and Jane still thinks, she's this A-list movie star. But they do end up having a child together. It's Jane's 5th child. And, they end up getting divorced, and when Jane dies, they're going through their divorce proceedings. I do want to point out that Jane was not a Satanist.
You're right. I've read that.
Yeah, the Anton LaVey photos go around quite a bit, but she most assuredly was not a Satanist. And in fact, when, those rumors came back to her, Jane was extremely offended and said that she would always love God.
Right. April, let's quickly get to her sudden death. June 29th, 1967. Where is she and what is she doing there?
So Jane was going on the supper club circuit. She would perform in nightclubs, supper clubs all around the United States. She is performing at Gus Stevens Club, which is in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is about an hour and a half from New Orleans, if anyone's been in the area. And, Gus is too cheap to get Jane a driver, and Jane doesn't expect to have to pay for her driver. So Gus goes and he gets his future son-in-law, who has only had about an hour's worth of sleep over the past 48 hours, to drive Jane to New Orleans because she is supposed to have, a thing there in the morning. She's going to appear on a radio show that morning. Jane puts 3 of her children in the car, one of which is, of course, Mariska Hargitay, who's on SVU. And she sits in the front seat with Ronnie Harrison, the driver, and Jane's new boyfriend, Samuel Brody. And they are, speeding down the road trying to get to New Orleans, and all of a sudden they run into the back of a tractor trailer. Now, at this point, they didn't have dot bars, which are also called Mansfield bars. So their car hit the truck on the side, and then it went under. Jane was not decapitated people claim, but she was scalped.
Okay. And all 3 kids were in the back seat, and there's a silver lining.
Yes, all 3 children were in the back seat. All 3 children survived. 2 out of the 4 chihuahuas that were in the car survived as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mariska has a scar on her face, which you can still see today. Miklos Jr. broke his arm, and Zoltan was injured as well on that. But the kids obviously survived. And the only reason they survived is because all 3 of them were asleep in the back seat.
Interesting. What went on after her death with the trust in her estate?
Oh, goodness. So the estate is in shambles because Jane doesn't have a will. So what ends up happening, they have a series of auctions. Mickey and Matt are sitting there fighting over who actually has control of the estate. Matt gets control in California, but Mickey has control of her body in Louisiana. And they have a series of very odd auctions. They even have a pet auction where they auction off Jane's dogs and cats.
Oh, terrible.
And, they're fighting back and forth for years. The estate doesn't get settled until almost 10 years after Jane's death, and it is completely eaten up by attorney's fees. At the time of her death, it was worth almost $2 million, including the house. But by the time all is said and done, all 5 of her kids only get $1,700 apiece.
Oh, and who ended up buying the Pink Palace?
So there's a common misconception that Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas had the house. That's not true. A former burlesque star and her businessman husband bought it from Matt Sember. They then sold it to Ringo Starr, who only had it for a couple months. And then finally, Engelbert Humperdinck gets the house, and he had the house until 2002 when it was demolished.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
So, he at one time tried to sell it on QVC. So that footage is on YouTube.
Oh, wow. Excellent. One more final question, April. First of all, thank you so much. Where can they get your book?
You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of the major book websites.
And are you working on another volume about Jayne Mansfield?
I am. I'm working on the 60s pictures, so that should be great, I think. At least I'm hoping it's great.
Have you written other books as well?
I have. I wrote a book on Marilyn Monroe back in 2016, but that one I'm also working on the second edition of it, so that one's no longer available.
Okay. So you get them on Amazon, and just in time for Christmas, guys. Run out and get this. It's a fascinating read. One more question. There were always rumors that she had an affair with JFK and RFK. Is there any truth in that?
I have never found anything to support it. We will say that. The JFK rumors, especially being she was like 8 months pregnant with Mariska when it was supposedly going on. I'm exaggerating slightly on there. She was supposed to be about 6 months pregnant. But yeah, there's no way that JFK was going around with a very heavily, visibly pregnant woman. I'll just leave it at that.
Right. And she also, real quick, she turned down the role of Ginger. Did she not in Gilligan's Island?
She did turn down the role of Ginger because she didn't think that she thought that she was above TV. In Jayne's defense, though, I do want to point out that if she had been sitting there and doing, the role of Ginger on Gilligan's Island, it never would have paid her enough money to keep up her lifestyle.
Wow.
I mean, she was earning, over $1,000 a night on the nightclub / supper club circuit, and Gilligan's would have paid her like about $1,500 a week.
Oh, wow, interesting. I did not know that. Yeah, TV didn't really pay that much that well. I mean, in terms of versus movies back then, that was the big thing. Movies, a lot of actors like today, they segregate a little bit to TV. They go on television. They're doing commercials now, but that was unheard of back then.
Yeah, if you went to TV, your star had fallen.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant to say. April, thank you so much for doing this. Guys, please run out and get her book. It's called Puffblicity, An Appreciation of Jayne Mansfield, the 1950s Pictures. It's a great read and some great, rare photos in that book as well. And April, again, thank you. I know it was short notice, and I appreciate this. And I'll blast this on social media as well.
Yeah, no, you were great. But thank you, Mike. You have been amazing. This was great. Thank you.
All right, guys, there you have it. April Vivea. I mean, I know she likes the way I pronounce her name. Nobody else can get that. April Vivea. She has, guys, get it for Christmas for that movie lover in your life. A lot of Jayne Mansfield groups on Facebook as well. Tell them, put it out there. Puffblicity, an appreciation of Jayne Mansfield, the 1950s Pictures. It's a fascinating book. The pictures, I mean, blow you away. Very rare photos of her and her family as well. So run out and get that on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.